Welcome to the latest episode of Mob Talk Sitdown. I'm Dave Schratwieser.
And I'm George Anastasia.
George, October is a month for anniversaries with the Philly mob, not the kind you celebrate.
Yeah, a hit and a miss. And we also have Sammy Gravano with some Philadelphia stories.
All right, George, let's start with the murder of mob soldier Ron Turchi in October 1999. Walk us through that.
Well, yeah, his 20th anniversary. Ronnie Turchi was Ralph Natale's guy, was the consigliere of the family at one point. This is after Natale begins to cooperate. And there was testimony at a subsequent trial. Peter Crumb Caprio said that Joe Legambi, the acting boss, told him we dimed out Ronnie to send a message to Ralph. So the supposition is Ronnie Turchi was killed because Natale was cooperating. Ronnie Turchi was with Natale. Now Turchi's body is found in the trunk of a car. I think he's naked. He was beaten up and shot in the head. So it was a gangland hit. One of the few during Legambi's era.
Yeah, like right at the beginning as well. So,
right.
1999. Joey is away in jail already, I believe, and Legambi is the acting boss of the family at that point.
Yeah, I don't know if Joey's away or my recollection was Joey was on trial in Camden around that time for threatening Mark Panero during the arrest. Right. Nothing came of that. He was acquitted of that charge. Yeah. But I think those things kind of overlap. But Turchi's body turns up in the trunk of a car down in South Philly.
Yeah, he's parked on the side of the street. He's tied up. He's naked. There's Viagra pills sprinkled all over the body and some money stuffed in places we don't need to talk about. But, you know, it's definitely meant to send a message to somebody.
Yeah.
Clearly. And the message was received not well.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's one of the unsolved murders that the feds have been working on ever since. I think they got bits and pieces of information, but they've never been able to bring any charges.
Right, and there's this little drive down the street with Roger Vela, who later becomes a cooperator, and somebody in the car with Roger says, hey, your buddy's in the trunk right over there. And that car sat there for a few days. We actually have video of the car, and they pop the trunk and they make this discovery, and then there's a scramble to figure out why did this happen.
Yeah, and I also think Vela might have had lunch or dinner with Turchi the day before the day that he disappeared. Yeah. So, I mean, Vela may know something. I don't think he knows specifics. And the problem with Vela, as we've discussed before, is his credibility is pretty suspect.
And this could be a problem for a bunch of people to carry out a murder like that, put him in the trunk of a car, drive him down the block. You have multiple people probably involved in that situation.
Oh, I think so. I think a lot of planning must have gone into it. And yeah, I mean, certainly the feds have been on this case forever. I think it's one of the ones they would like to make, but again, they haven't been able to put it together.
Well, tell us about Ron Turchi. What was his kind of role in the Philly mob?
I mean, Turchi's reputation was that he always had his hand out, that he liked to be a wise guy, that he was involved in a lot of wheeling and dealing, but he wasn't a big moneymaker. And at one point, I think, you know, he was aligned with Natale, and then I think
he was in jail with Ralph Natale.
Yeah.
Yep.
And my recollection was at one point he even wanted to be the boss, and he was trying to go to New York and get some backing for that. So it was a very convoluted time. This is, you know, the Stampa War that takes place. Then Natale comes in, and Turchi survived all of that, I think, by staying kind of in the middle. Yeah. And ultimately he picked a side and it ended up costing him his life, I guess.
All right, let's go ahead to Halloween.
Halloween of 1989.
Actually fall back to 1989.
1989.
Dante and Luigi's restaurant in South Philadelphia. Great place to eat, by the way.
Right.
Great dinners there.
Yeah.
Nicky Scarfo Jr. is having dinner in there with a bunch of his a cousin and
two
a
other
couple
guys,
friends, right?
Clams and spaghetti, I think he's having.
Yeah, and in walks somebody wearing a Halloween mask.
And carrying a trick-or-treat bag. Walks up to the table, pulls a gun out of the bag, and shoots Nicky 5 or 6 times. Right. Nicky Jr. And he survives the hit. But, I mean, if you look at seminal events, I mean, that particular event, I think, effectively ended Scarfo's control of the Philadelphia mob, because it was Scarfo Sr. was in jail at the time. And I think this was the way for the guys on the street saying, you're done, we're finished with you, this is the end of it.
Yeah. The two other guys at the table do not get hit by any gunfire.
Yeah, I mean, this was all aimed at Nicky Jr. And the amazing thing, I talked to people in law enforcement afterwards, 5 or 6 shots and he survives.
Yeah. From a high-powered weapon.
Yeah, I mean, no vital organ was hit. And I think he was out of the hospital a short time later. And then he hightailed it to North Jersey, where he was under the protection of a faction of the Scarfo family, and ultimately segued into the Lucchese organization.
Yeah. Let's talk about the gunman and what the gunman does after he fires off those 5 or 6 shots into Scarfo Jr. What does he do? Well,
I mean, he's leaving the restaurant and he drops the gun, kind of like Pacino in the Godfather movie. It's very symbolic, and at least some informants have told the feds that was deliberate, sending a message to Scarfo Sr., who apparently loved the Godfather movies, you know, this is kind of in your face. The supposition has always been that Joey Merlino was the shooter that day. Nobody's ever been charged. I think law enforcement believes it. I think a couple cooperators have said it. And there's also a taped conversation between Scarfo Jr. and his father, who was in jail, talking about the hit. And basically, they referred to the shooter as a snake. And Senior from jail tells his son, you got to take that guy to dinner, meaning do to him what he did to you.
Yeah.
Everybody said it was Joey. Joey denies that. Joey told me it couldn't have been him because he was on probation at the time and was not allowed out after 7 at night.
Okay.
So that was...
When you talk about the gun being dropped, though, when we arrive on the scene that night, reporters, there's the gun like right there.
Yeah.
It's not like it was around the corner somewhere. It was literally right in front of the restaurant, right
just
there.
Like in the movie,
Hey,
yeah.
look at this
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
And my understanding is Joey was not alone in this, allegedly, but he was never charged. There was someone else also
There was a
waiting around the
driver
corner-
waiting for him, yeah.
waiting around the corner to
Yeah.
pick him up and drive him away.
Yeah.
But again, I want to be very clear here. He's denied this. Nobody's ever charged him with it. There are no charges. We haven't heard about any new charges coming along. It's just what's been out there for years now.
Yeah, I mean, it's 1989. The statute's long gone on that one. It wasn't a murder. It was
Right.
an attempt.
Attempted
I don't
murder.
think anybody could be charged with that now, even if they admitted it. But that was during a very turbulent era in the Philadelphia Underworld.
Yeah.
And it's 30 years ago. It's hard to believe it was 30 years ago.
Well, walk us through a little bit of what happens after that. When Nicky Jr. goes to North Jersey.
He goes to North Jersey, and George Frezzolone and those guys are kind of protecting him while he's up in North Jersey. And the Philadelphia mob, I mean, this is 1989 now. Stanford comes back from prison in 90 and basically tries to reorganize, put things back together.
Yeah.
And eventually that devolves into this friction between Stanford and the old guys.
Yeah.
And Merlino and the young guys, and that's another mob war that breaks out. Ralph Natale from prison is aligning himself with Joey,
Right.
and eventually he comes out and takes over the family.
Talk to me about how infuriated Nicky Sr. must have been in prison when his son almost gets killed.
Well, I mean, remember, we've heard that from prison he put out a $500,000 contract on Joey, and I think you talked to Joey on camera about all of that.
And we did, and Joey said the famous line, give me the $500,000, I'll kill myself.
Yeah, I mean that was typical Joey Merlino. A lot of bravado, a lot of quips, not afraid of the camera, and it was part of I guess the bizarre history of the Philadelphia organized crime family. Scarfo from jail, desperately trying to keep control of the organization, and the guys on the street saying, you're done. You got to remember, this comes in the wake of Scarfo and 15, 16 guys being indicted and sent to prison for racketeering. Scarfo, during his era as mob boss, I think from 1981 to 1986, 87, 88, I think 20, 25 guys were killed.
Yeah.
And then another 20 guys are indicted. So Scarfo really decimated this crime family with his management style.
I'm innocent, that's all.
And this was a way for the guys on the streets to say, you're done, it's over.
30 years later, Joey's out of prison in South Florida. Nicky Scarfo Jr. is in prison till like 2035.
Right.
It's a weird way this kind of all worked out.
Yeah, it is. You think about it. I mean, Nicky Jr. has paid a tremendous price for the sins of his father. I mean, you would think a guy would not want his son to get involved in that. Instead, he wanted his son involved, and he's nearly killed. He's been jailed, I think, 3 times, and as you said, right now he's doing, I think, 30 years for that First Plus financial fraud.
Yeah, I've heard mob bosses congratulate other mobsters and mob bosses for not having their sons involved. Unfortunately, that didn't happen here.
Yeah, and I think the only other example of that is Gotti Jr. and Gotti Sr. in New York. And again, Gotti Jr. paid a big price for his father. So, yeah, there's no upside, I think, in any of that.
All right, George, let's talk about an interview that's out right now with Sammy the Bull Gravano, former underboss in the Gambino crime family under John Gotti, turned cooperator, turned on John Gotti. Interesting interview with Patrick Bet David, captivating everybody. Kind of a lot of folks who follow the mob are definitely watching this.
Yeah, Beck David has done a lot of good interviews. I mean, they're in depth. They go on and on. Some people would say it's a little bit of overkill, but you know, if you're interested in that, there's a lot of information that comes out. The question is, how much of it is believable, how much is credible. The Sammy Gravano interview goes on for, I think, over 2 hours.
He definitely pulled the curtain back here. A lot of F-bombs throughout the thing. Sammy being Sammy, telling stories, and actually seemed to be enjoying it from my point of view, that he was getting to talk about all this.
Yeah, I think it was his, you know, he wants to have the final, all these guys like to have the final word. I think that's part of what it is. And the Gravanos have really turned that whole celebrity gangster thing into it. I mean, his daughter, Karen Gravano, was in that mob Mob Wives reality TV show. So, yeah, I mean, I think they see the media as a platform, and he wants to tell a story.
Book, podcast, stuff like that.
All of that kind of stuff. And he talked a little bit about Philadelphia.
Well, talk about that. There's a nice little story in the middle of the big story where he talks about getting a phone call from Philip Leonetti, then the underboss, youngest underboss in the Philly mob, asking him to come from New York to Atlantic City to sit down with Nicky Scarfo Sr. when Nicky was in charge at an Atlantic City hotel because Nicky wasn't allowed in the casinos. Walk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, Gravano says he was exhausted. He had been working or whatever all day and had to drive down from Staten Island to Atlantic City, and he met with Scarfo in a hotel room in one of the casino hotels. And it's kind of a bizarre conversation, according to Gravano, where Scarfo basically says, you got a problem with that bum?
Yeah.
Meaning John Gotti Sr.
And he takes offense to that, Gravano.
Right. I mean, at this point, Gravano and Gotti are, running the organization and supposedly best friends, and he kind of backs away from, what are you talking about? Why are you saying this? And eventually they part on good terms, but I think it was indicative, if it's true, that there was some unrest within organized crime given what Gotti was about. Gotti became the high-profile gangster, and I think a lot of people were upset about all the celebrity attention he was bringing to himself.
Gravano takes issue with Nicky calling him a bum. Says, hey, that's my boss.
Yeah.
That's my friend.
Right. I mean,
don't call him that.
He's still playing by the rules at that point. Eventually he flips and turns on Gotti Sr., but at that point he doesn't want any part of it, although the implication is Scarfo and some other leaders of organized crime were less than happy with the way Gotti was running the crime family.
And interesting, before he leaves, Nicky says to him, don't worry, we got your back if anything goes on up there. And that's his version of the story. I've heard another version, and the version I'm hearing is that meeting was about setting up a meeting on Staten Island with Gotti, that Gotti wanted to meet Nicky Scarfo and Philip Leonetti. They wanted to meet him. Don't know what the reasons were, and actually a meeting did take place on Staten Island at somebody's home where Gotti met with Nicky Sr., excuse me, and with Philip Leonetti, and it was a good meeting. They liked each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think Leonetti wrote about that in his book, Mafia Prince. But prior to all of this, there was a interaction between Gravano and Leonetti back in, I think, 81, 82, and again, focused on Philadelphia. There was a guy from Trenton named Frank Stilatano, Frankie Stales, who had shot and killed the son of a mob capo in Trenton. And the Gambinos were looking for him, couldn't find him. Word was he was hiding out in Northeast Philly. Gravano apparently contacted Leonetti, and basically Leonetti and Scarfo said, don't worry, we'll take care of it for you. And Stilatano's body turns up in the trunk of a car at the Philadelphia International Airport.
And Gravano also says in the interview that, he had done some stuff helping those guys out with the war down there.
Yeah.
So clearly there's some kind of interaction, and I'm told he and Leonetti did run around Atlantic City a little bit. They weren't friends or anything like that, but they did kind of hang out together.
And I also remember Gravano admitted that he was the one who killed Johnny DeSimone in the wake of the Bruno murder. So yeah, I think he might have been referencing that as well. Bruno was killed in 1980. By 81, Scarfo's the boss. So a lot of that fits chronologically, although I think Sammy may be mixing up a couple meetings in that.
And let's be clear, this is his version of what happened there. We haven't heard from Philip Leonetti, and obviously Nicky Scarfo Sr. is dead.
Right.
So it'd be tough to verify that.
But it's interesting, the Gambino-Gravano Philadelphia connection. I think there definitely was one.
All right, George, let's wrap this up with a bizarre story coming out of a Lucchese trial in White Plains, New York. Chris Londonio was one of the guys on trial. A bizarre story about an escape plan from a New York prison. Yeah,
the MCC detention center in New York. Dental floss was going to be used, bed sheets, and the most bizarre thing is the loss of, he was a 350-pound gangster. He couldn't fit out the window, so he went in an extensive exercise routine to try to lose enough weight to fit through the window. None of it ever happened, but it's a bizarre story.
His lawyer denies it, by the way. We'll see you next time.